All right. Good evening, everybody. Man, Facebook, you get the camera all set, and then all of a sudden it's totally different than where you had it set before. All right. My name's Adam White, and it is time for the June 2023 Government and Legislative Affairs Update. And I am obviously not in my normal location. Been a long, crazy day. I've been flying all day long, and I volunteer and help at a youth camp down on the Yukon River. And today is a staff day, and we are hauling staff members in and out. And so could not do it in the hangar because there's still a bunch of things happening there at the hangar here in Indiana. So I had to make a quick trip back to the house, which is good because I get to have a little bit of a bite to eat for supper before I get back out there and do another couple of flights. So anyway, long explanation. My name's Adam White. I do government legislative affairs for the Alaska Airmen's Association, and it is time for our monthly government affairs update. And we've got a lot of things to talk about, and I'm going to try to keep it at that 20-minute mark. That seems to be the sweet spot for everybody as far as time goes. So it was great to see a lot of you at the Great Alaska Aviation Gathering in Palmer. Man, that's already been more than a month ago. Seems like it was just yesterday. And then other times it seems like, was that even this summer? So anyway, great to see a lot of you there. Good to follow up with a bunch of you about questions and things that we've talked about in the past. And so, yeah, it was good. Had decent weather. It wasn't perfect weather, but then again, wasn't bad weather either. And that's always a balance to try to find, right? If it's perfect weather, folks may decide to go do something other than come to the gathering. And if it's bad weather, well, who wants to walk around outside in the rain or the snow and the wind? Which we've had all that at the gatherings from one year or another. So first, let me go through and talk about some of the things that are going on for us here at the Airmen's Association. Tomorrow night in Fairbanks is the summer solstice picnic in conjunction with the Fairbanks General Aviation Association. And it seems like Facebook, that camera is slipping. So yeah, tomorrow evening, 5:30 at the campground at Fairbanks International Airport is the summer solstice cookout and barbecue, picnic, whatever you want to call it. Look forward to seeing you there. If you're a member of the Airmen's Association or of the General Aviation Association for Fairbanks, I encourage you to be there. If you're not a member of either one of those things, you should probably still show up anyway and maybe become a member. I'll be there tomorrow night. If the weather permits, I've got another full day of flying to do tomorrow. I will be on my way up to Fairbanks at the end of the day, flying up there, and I will be arriving via airplane if all things go according to plan. So I look forward to seeing you there tomorrow night, chance to socialize and visit and talk about some of the issues. So speaking of the issues, let's go ahead and get right to it. TFRs, it's that time of year. Fire-related TFRs are already popping up, and as you can see, it's definitely summertime. I got mosquitoes brought into the house when I came in. TFRs, there's been a TFR down at the Healy area for the Ridgetop fire, and want to say thank you to the Alaska Fire Service for listening to our concerns about the shape and the size of that fire TFR. Initially, it was just a point radius like they always are to start out with, and we understand that things are very dynamic at the beginning of a fire, and so we give them a little bit of some time to figure out what's going on. And then when the TFR blocked Windy Pass, made it difficult for us to fly through the pass as civil users, went ahead and called them and asked them to see if they couldn't change that a little bit. And they did, to their credit. They worked on that. It took them about 18 hours or so, but they did it. And so it was a great cooperation to be able to get that fire TFR shrunk down just a bit so we could all operate and go through the pass. As you probably remember, the military also had a TFR that popped up earlier this spring with the tragic accident there of the Apaches. And again, just a simple point radius TFR, but that one was really, really big. And again, totally understand the dynamics of a developing situation. But after some time, reached out to the military and to Anchorage Center, requested for that to change just a bit. And again, to their credit, they reevaluated what they really needed and shrunk it down, and so it wasn't interfering with a lot of other activities in the area. So same thing goes for the presidential TFRs. I want to say thank you to the 11th Air Force Airspace folks and the FAA military liaisons. They're in Anchorage working with the Secret Service to get those times for the VIP TFRs, to get them down to match the reality and update those. Now, the disadvantage to those things is that means that you have to keep on top of where and when the TFRs are in place. So the best way to do that is contact flight service. We've got our third-party apps. We got ForeFlight, Garmin app, and all those things that we use on our devices. But you should still verify. What was it, Ronald Reagan that said you should trust but verify? Call flight service and make sure that you've got the latest information. And talk to them on the radio when you're flying through the area. And while you're at it, follow pilot report. When's the last time you actually did that? Pilot reports are very helpful and very useful for not just the weather forecasters, but folks that are flying in the area that are trying to find out if they can make it through with the weather or not. So TFRs, big thing. So be on the lookout for those. A lot of folks have reached out asking about girdwood and the development that's happening. The proposed development, I should say. Let's make sure we don't get ahead of ourselves with anything. The proposed development at the Girdwood Airport. There's a developer that's put in a lease application to put a 150-room lodge with some outbuildings on the Girdwood Airport. And, I'll just come out and say it. The Alaska Airmen's Association doesn't think that that's a compatible land use for an airport, especially an airport that is in dire need of more tie-down spots and more hangar space. So we've gone on record voicing our concern about that. And not that we are against development. We're not against that. We actually think that it may be very useful to have a 150-room lodge and building in Girdwood. We just don't think that the airport's the right place to put it, considering the need for other uses for the airport that are very much more compatible with what an airport's really there for, aviation. Now, there was a proposal in that lease application for some aeronautical activity. They were talking about having some tie-down spaces. They were talking about doing some helicopter tour, heli-skiing, and that sort of thing. But it's still going to take up a lot of airport property that needs to stay open and usable for lease lots for hangars or for more development for tie-downs. So that's what the position is of the Airmen's Association with that. A lot of folks have called and emailed and inquired what our position is on that development. One of the things that's happening right now is state DOT is going through and kind of doing a gap analysis. They have contracted with a company to evaluate infrastructure, evaluate what we have, what we may think we may need, and also working with the FAA to find out what resources we have available to us. And so that's a very interesting project, trying to determine where people normally fly, how they fly, what they need when they're en route, what they need when they get on the ground, all of those things. And to be honest with you, so far, a lot of the stuff that has been determined was no surprise by any of us. It was one of those things like, oh, well, yeah, I'm glad the data actually supports what we thought all along. So that's an ongoing process. It is not going to be done in any time soon. So look for more details and more information about that as we get further along. Let's talk about FAA reauthorization. It's a big deal. I've been reading through both the House and the Senate version of the FAA reauthorization bill. If you're not familiar, the FAA has to be reauthorized every 5 years, plus or minus. And we are in the middle of that cycle. And there's almost 1,300 pages between those two bills. And I've been reading through that. And I'll tell you, if you have insomnia, this is probably a pretty good cure for insomnia, trying to read through that bill. And of course, the joke is that a lot of times folks in DC don't actually read the bills that they vote on. Well, they have staffers that understand and know what's in there. But I'm doing our due diligence as the Alaska Airmen's Association to know and understand what is in that bill. There's a lot of things that we have talked about with our delegation in the past years that has made its way into the bills. Now the heavy lift is to make sure they stay in the bill. So some of the things that are there, just to read through a short list: workforce development. That's a big phrase these days, and that's a hot topic. But the FAA is going to be encouraged to do a lot more for workforce development with this new FAA reauthorization bill if it passes as it's presented right now. ADS-B, equipage, and ground stations. There is some language in both versions of those bills to talk about what it would take to get people to equip, and there's a possibility of another financial incentive. And you could probably hear the train as it comes barreling through Nenana as we have the windows open here in the house. Apologize for that. It's still transportation noise, but it's not the sound of an airplane that we normally have when I'm out at the hangar. So yeah, ADS-B incentive, there's some stipulations that are being placed on that and back and forth in arguments one way or the other. And not sure if that's going to make it all the way through to the final version, but we'll have to wait and see. Funding for more weather cameras and more weather stations. That's obviously a big need and things that we've been talking to our delegation about a lot. One of the things that's interesting in there, and there's a lot of things, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about all of them, but there is something pretty interesting that's in there that doesn't specifically say Alaska, but you know that's what we're talking about, because it talks about communities that do not have access to other forms of transportation, like not on a road system, communities that rely on their airport for the majority of their goods and services and for transportation needs. And that sounds an awful lot like a lot of places in Alaska, but it also sounds like places in Hawaii. It sounds like places possibly in the mountain states in the lower 48 as well. So not sure how that's going to pan out with how they're going to work some of this, but the gist of what the language is in the reauthorization bill would be to basically tell the FAA, you can't shorten a runway. If a community has a runway of, let's just say, just throwing out numbers, let's say 4,000 feet long, but yet all the aircraft that come in and out of that airport now primarily are caravans. Caravan doesn't need a 4,000-foot runway. But it sure is nice to have it, because occasionally you get a bigger airplane into that community that brings in a much larger load of freight. Or it's a dark night in a snowstorm, and you've got an instrument approach, and the medevac flight coming in really does appreciate having that little extra buffer in the runway length. But the FAA, in their attempt to be frugal, and their attempt to make sure that they are administering federal funds in a proper way, which I fully support, and understand their dilemma, because that's actually what this is a dilemma. They say that they can't federally fund keeping an airport those specific links sometimes, because the use of the airport just doesn't justify it. And so when it's time to resurface the runway, when it's time to replace the runway lights, when it's time to do something else with something going on at the airport that federal funds would pay for, sometimes airports are shortened. Sometimes there's things that are already at an airport that then goes away. And so there's language in this version of the FAA reauthorization bill that would make it so the FAA would not be required to do those things. In fact, they would be told that they could not do those things anymore. So that would be a huge win for Alaska if that were to go through. So those are just some of the things that are in the FAA reauthorization bill. Again, more than 1,200 pages of things that I've been reading through for the past couple of weeks. If you know, the House has passed their version. The Senate was talking about it. It stalled out last week because there are some concerns about pilot minimum qualifications. And so there's going to be some back and forth on that before the Senate takes up that bill. But they've got till September. And I'm sure they'll go ahead and get something done by September. But so that's probably the biggest thing that's on my plate right now for the Airmen's Association, is going through and finding out exactly what's in that reauthorization bill and working with our delegation, supporting the things that we see benefiting Alaska. Just an update, several folks have asked about the retest for several folks with their instrument check rides where they were reached out to by the FAA and told that they were going to have to redo a portion of their instrument check ride. Well, there has been 74 of the 126 people that have completed that as of last week, basically a week ago today. Of those 74, only one person had to go back and try again. And so that's actually a pretty good pass rate, to be honest with you. And my understanding is that person was going to retest at the end of last week, and I hope they pass that second go around. However, it's interesting. There are quite a few of those 126 people that have not responded to the FAA in their letter. Now, that may be that they haven't actually received their letter yet, because folks have reached out to me and said, hey, I work, actually folks work in different parts of the world, do shift work, and they're going to be gone for 3 months. They're not going to get their mail, but they heard this was going on and they think they may be a part of it, and they may not be there to actually receive their mail. Other folks, their address has changed and they didn't update their contact information with the FAA, which, by the way, you know you're supposed to do that, right? And so now the FAA has an old address for them. So lots of different reasons why someone may not have received the word. I really hope that there's not somebody out there that got the letter that is ignoring the letter. Please don't do that. Please reach out to the FAA. They are actually trying really hard to make this as easy as possible to get you fully vetted again as an instrument-rated pilot. The Airmen's Association still has the offer out there for you. If you are in the Anchorage area and you'd like to go get some simulator time at the UAA Center there at Merrill Field, we can make that happen. And apologize that, if those folks that don't live in the Anchorage area, really makes that difficult to have access to that. But we do encourage you, if this is a financial burden, if this is something that makes it impossible for you to try to comply with, please reach out to us and let us know that. We can't promise anything, but scholarship funds, we just went through that whole process and awarded a bunch of scholarships. And there's a possibility that we may be able to help you in some other way to make sure that you can get this done. So, one other thing that we are looking at and talking about just in the last couple of minutes, you've probably heard about FBO fees. It's more of a lower 48 issue because here in Alaska we have very, very limited number of full-service fixed-base operators. But the Alaska Airmen's Association understands this issue that is plaguing a lot more people in the lower 48 with transparency of pricing and making sure that they know what they're going to be charged and that the rates are published. That doesn't seem too hard of a question and too much to ask, but it's a very difficult task right now to get that published. And we live in a capitalistic society, and I am all for capitalism. And I totally understand supply and demand. I understand the competition between businesses and not wanting to show your hand to your competitor and all of that. But when somebody comes up and wants to use your facility and use the services that you provide, and yet there's no clear answer as to what you're going to charge them for the services that you're going to offer, and then there's surprises at the end of things that don't really make sense when you look at the bill, that's a little frustrating. I'm not going to lie. And so the Alaska Airmen's Association, for a long time, has supported our coalition partners, to borrow a phrase from the military. Alaska Airmen's Association has supported AOPA and other organizations in the lower 48 in their campaign for transparency. But I'm hearing more and more reports of this occurring here in our own state at some of the limited places where we do have full service FBOs. So just be aware that we are working that issue as well. It's not just something that happens to folks in the lower 48, and it is not just people who show up in their Falcon 10s and their Gulfstreams and their Citations. It happens to folks who show up in their Super Cubs and it happens to folks who show up in their Cessnas as well. So just be aware that we are aware, and we're also working on that issue. So that's about all the time we've got. I want to remind you that tomorrow night in Fairbanks, at the campground at the Fairbanks International Airport, we have the summer solstice cookout in conjunction with the Fairbanks General Aviation Association. I plan on being there, and if my flying schedule tomorrow, I've got a full day of flying again tomorrow. If it allows and if the weather permits, I will be in Fairbanks. Hopefully be able to enjoy a good hamburger with a lot of you in Fairbanks tomorrow at 5:30, once again at the Fairbanks International Campground. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off, and enjoy your summer, and we'll talk again. See you.